Welcome to Dungeon Academics. My name is Thomas and I will be your instructor. I'd like to make a short video about one of my favourite things in the world and favourite things in the game. Dice! Yes! I love dice, which you could probably tell if you've watched many of my videos. Some of my favourite videos have been on the maths behind rolling dice. And dice is something that's integral to almost all tabletop roleplay games I have played. There are only a few roleplay games I've played that don't use dice. Things like Dread, which uses a wooden tumbling block game, Jenga for example, and Fiasco, which is done entirely with cards. But the vast majority of tabletop roleplay games use dice, and dice are a nice way of generating random numbers or a value from a pattern of numbers. One of my first videos, the Fireball Fiasco, was on how rolling large numbers of dice together and adding them up doesn't create a random number anymore. It actually creates a very predictable number. And I would strongly suggest you go and watch the Fireball Fiasco and the Fireball Fiasco Maths Edition, because I do love the maths there. They were one of the first videos that I made. Obviously, they are more produced, but very different in style. Give them a go, see what you think. Anyway, a question came up in Reddit, like, how many dice do you need to start playing Dungeons & Dragons? Because most people that have played for a long time are dice goblins. They have bags and bags of dice, and I do have bags and bags of dice. But when I've been playing in the cafe board game in Helsinki, I've been taking this with me. This is a little tool organizer, and this has been serving me very, very well. So how many dice do you need to start playing Dungeons & Dragons? Well, most likely the answer is going to be 0. Most people, when they have their first few games, they come to a table, they've got no idea what to do, and someone will lend them their dice just to start with. And that's fine. In fact, that's such a low barrier of entry that it makes the game accessible to almost everyone. As long as one person around the table has got the books and has got a set of dice, and you've got access to pencils and paper, you can start playing Dungeons & Dragons. And I really love that about the hobby, that it's so easy to get into. But once you've played for a while, getting your own dice is quite useful, because having to swap dice between everyone during the game takes a bit of time. Trying to work out whose dice is whose can be quite awkward, especially if you have similar coloured sets. And it's nice to have your own stuff when playing a game. Now, most polyhedral dice come in sets of 7. That's a D4, a D6, a D8, a D10, a variant D10 called a percentile dice, a D12 and a D20, 7 dice. And you may have noticed that my box here only has 6 compartments in. That's because in this compartment here, you can just see it there, I have percentile dice and D10. I've got 2 percentile dice and the rest are D10s. Why have I got so many dice? Well, having one of each is fine. You can work with that. But there are lots of situations where you're going to have to stop the game and roll a set of dice and add them together. And doing it one dice at a time is a little bit more awkward than just rolling the whole lot at once and getting on with it. So let's start with the main dice for Dungeons & Dragons, the D20. This is the one you're going to be rolling the most often. And I think having 2 of these is important. When you're rolling with advantage and disadvantage, you roll 2 dice and pick the highest or lowest value depending on the circumstances. So having 2 is a lot better than having 1. Because when you've got 1, you've got to roll it, remember the value, roll it again, and then see which of those 2 values you're going to take. If you've got 2 D20, you roll them both at the same time. Now, if you're playing an elf, you might be tempted to take the Elven Accuracy feat, which under some circumstances allows you to roll 3 D20 and pick the highest. Mathematically, it doesn't say that. What it says is when rolling with advantage, you may re-roll one of your dice. Mathematically, that's exactly the same as rolling 3 dice and picking the highest. There is zero difference in outcomes mathematically. So most people just call it triple advantage, roll 3 dice and pick the highest. I think that's quickest and easiest. That's why if you're playing an elf, you want 3 d20. The next one to think about is d6. These are probably the dice that most people are familiar with. And if you talk about dice to someone who isn't into tabletop roleplay games, they're automatically going to assume 6-sided dice. If you say dice without any other qualifier to it, we can assume it's a 6-sided dice. And I think you need 4 at a bare minimum, because if you're rolling for characters, character creation uses 4d6. You roll 4 dice, you take away the lowest value, and then you add the 3 remaining ones, and that's going to be one of your ability scores. So having 4d6 is really useful. Having to roll 1d6 4 times, work out which is the lowest one, and then add the other 3 together is really awkward if you can't roll all 4 at the same time. Is 4 the right number of dice to have? Probably for most players. You're not going to need much more than that. A critical hit with a greatsword does 4d6 damage, but a fireball does 8d6 damage. So if you're playing a sorcerer or a wizard or someone who's going to be casting fireballs, having those 8 dice so you can roll them all at once is quite useful. But what if you upcast fireball? Well, upcasting fireball can use up to 14d6. Now, getting 14d6 together and rolling them all, that's the kind of territory where you probably want to be using a dice tray so they don't go across the whole table. But it is very satisfying. I was looking at a thread in Reddit about using the most dice, and someone came up with a situation with a bugbear assassin multi-class that could do 49d6 damage with the right abilities turned on. Rolling 49 dice at the same time and then adding them all up is going to take a while. My personal tip for rolling large numbers of dice and adding them together is match up pairs of dice that add up to 10. So, 2 5s, that's 10. 6 and a 4, that's 10. 3 3 4, that's 10. So you match up in groups of 10 and you count how many sets of 10 you got. That's the quickest way. But even then, rolling 49 dice is going to take quite a while to add up. Now, I come from a background playing Warhammer, and rolling large handfuls of dice in Warhammer is relatively common. A unit of 20 Guardian Defenders firing their shuriken catapults would get 40 attacks, so I would roll 40 dice to hit. An orc mob with 30 boys in it could get 120 attacks on the charge. So you need a literal bucket of dice for that. So I have lots of d6, but I think 8d6 is probably going to be enough for most people. And if you're casting fireball, you roll your 8d6, add it up, and then add on any more that you need. Now, the other dice, the percentile dice, I can't think of many situations where you need to roll multiple percentile dice. There are some games that have D1000 or even D10,000 tables in. So having a percentile and 3 further D10s could be useful then. But a handful of D10s is always useful. D8s. D8s, if you're playing a paladin, you will know these as your smite dice, and they will be your favourite dice. If you use a level 5 spell slot to smite against an undead creature, that's 7d8. If you're attacking with a weapon that does d8 damage anyway, that's 8d8. And if it's a crit, that's 16d8. Do you need 16 8-sided dice? Probably not. If you're ever in that circumstance where you do get to roll them all at the same time, would that make you happy? Probably yes. But d8s are not the most used dice in the game. D12s. D12s are my favourite dice. I like the mathematical symmetry to it. I find them to be a very pleasing shape. But again, they're much less used. There are a few weapons that do D12 damage, things like lances and the great axe, but they're not that common. And finally, D4s. How many D4s do you need? Cloud of Daggers, when upcast to a level 9 spell slot, uses 18 D4 damage, or 16 D4 damage, something like that. There's another spell I think does 20 D4 damage with a level 9 spell slot. Are these the best spells to be using your level 9 spell slot on? Certainly not. Would rolling 20 of these be fun? Maybe. Do I recommend you have 20 of them? Absolutely not. So how many dice do you actually need? Well, I think the standard polyhedral set of 7 is a good place to start. But anyone who's selling dice, specifically for Dungeons and Dragons players, you should definitely consider having 3d20 in your set. Maybe 2d20 and then have an elven add-on where you get a third d20. A couple of d12s. A percentile dice and a couple of d10s. Maybe 4d8, 8d6, and 4d4. Now that's putting your dice set as being a lot bigger than the 7 set dice. But I think most Dungeons & Dragons players would appreciate having a set of dice that they can use for most circumstances that are all coordinated and matching. There is something appealing about rolling a set of dice where they're all from the same set rather than 8 different coloured dice that's been scrounged from other players across the table. Do you need that many? No. Is it nice to have? Yes. And one of the things I've been talking about is a way for Wizards of the Coast to correctly monetize the game. Wizards of the Coast makes Dungeons and Dragons. They sell Dungeons and Dragons. It's their business. And a way for a company to make money is by selling products that the user likes, that the user wants, that the user finds desirable. Now, I don't necessarily want subscription fees and microtransactions and loot boxes. But what I do want are nice things that I play the game with. So a nice fancy dice set that actually has the right number of dice for me, all in one set, in a nice box that's compartmentalized, but not a cheap toolbox. That would be good. I got this because it's got the 6 sections in, so I can have my dice segregated, making it easier to pick out the ones that I need. Before that, I had my dice in a big bag like this. Now I've got all my different Warhammer pin badges here. That I've got some more somewhere. That's not a Warhammer pin badge, that's a Teachers Union pin badge, OAJ, but don't need to worry about that. But I've got a couple of Iron Halos, Tau, Vampire Counts, 25th anniversary. I've got a selection of pin badges here. Nice Inquisition one. But I found trying to dig out the right dice from this was just, it wasn't practical, it wasn't fun, it slowed the game down. So I thought I want to have something that separates my dice out. And this was perfect. Now, in a previous video, I talked about this being one of my crowning achievements. This is a prototype for a player aid for my own game mechanic. And the idea is that you have the dice on a player tool and they are in order. And your different abilities tell you how many dice to skip and then how many dice to take. So having them lined up like this is perfect, because if you skip the first 5 dice and then take the next 7, that's really easy. But trying to do that when they're all mixed up in a box, that's really impractical. So a player aid like this for that game would be perfect. So part of what I like doing is I like thinking, how can I write rule mechanics that make player aids that are useful but not necessary, and that players would want to have in their collection? And this is what Wizards of the Coast should be doing with Dungeons and Dragons. How can we write a game that's fun to play, that's accessible, that has a very low bar of entry, so you don't need to buy lots of expensive stuff to play. You don't have to have a high-end computer with an expensive graphics card running the particular piece of software. What can we encourage our players to buy that they would want to have, that would add to their gaming experience? And a nice, official Dungeons and Dragons dice box that's got segregated areas for the different dice, that has the right number of dice in it, or possibly the option to buy more dice from the same style. Oh, you know what? I want that extra D20 because I'm going to play an elf and I'm going to play a wizard, so I want enough dice for Fireball. I want that add-on. That's something that players would like, I think, and that's something that players would want to spend money on. So I like dice. I like having nice dice. I like using nice dice. And I'm prepared to spend a bit of money to get a nice dice in a nice box that I'm going to enjoy using. I love the dice boxes that have a built-in tray. And I'd really like it, because one thing I don't like about this is when I open it, the lid means I have double the footprint and I can't really use this as a nice dice rolling tray. It would be nice if I had a system where the lid could sort of come up and maybe flip round, so there's like a tray, so I can still get the dice inside and then roll them on the tray on top. That would be a nice bit of design. That would be something I'd be happy to spend money on, because it would make my gameplay experience more fun. So designing a game so that it has these things that you could get, you don't need, but you could get, and it would make the gameplay more fun. That's how you can make money from a game. That's how you can make money from everyone that's playing the game, not just the games master. So get some dice, get some nice dice. Roll them, have fun, play games, and put your dice in a plastic lunchbox if it makes you happy. Makes me happy. So thank you, and enjoy your next game, whatever it may be.